Welcome to the Politics of Everything. I'm Amber Daines, your host and podcast producer. This is a half hour of power, a podcast dropping every week where I unpack the politics of everything, from money to motherhood, nutrition to narcissism, startups to secularism, the environment, quality, and much, much more. Our guests are seasoned in the field or topic of their choice, even if you've not heard of them yet. This is a non-partisan show. So while I love exploring varied views and get a buzz from a healthy debate of ideas, this is not a purely blue, white, green program. Please subscribe, tune in and enjoy the politics of everything. This episode refers to trauma, so listener caution is recommended. Dr. Caroline Lloyd is a GP with a multifaceted career. After graduating from Monash University, she worked in traditional general practice, women's health, sexual health, cosmetic dermatology, hypnotherapy, and bariatric surgery, and has now found her passion in mental health. Completing her master's in counselling led to training in EMDR, which I actually had to look this up. It was eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. And now she specialises in the treatment of trauma utilising this process. She really enjoys helping her clients become unstuck from their past traumas, facilitating their progress to a calmer, more connected and fulfilling life. Caroline works at Cabrini Women's Mental Health Lisa Thurin Centre in her own counselling private practice and in Bariatric Medicine. And today, the topic we're discussing is the politics of trauma, and I warmly welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much, Amber. It's lovely to be with you.
Podcasting remotely can be challenging, but it doesn't have to be. Since day one of the politics of everything, I have relied on Zencastr's all-in-one solution to make the process quick and painless, the way it should be for those of us who just love great content and want to get our ideas out into the world. If you know me, I'm obsessed with quality in terms of my guests, my sound, and everything about my show has to be great the first time. I'm time poor. It's so easy to use Zencastr. I'm not tech savvy and you don't need to be either. There's nothing to download. Just click on the link and off we go. Zencastr is all about making your podcasting experience easy, and with everything from local recording to automatic post-productions now in their toolkit, you don't have to leave your browser to get that episode done, and done fast. I have a special offer for you, and hopefully you can experience what I have with Zencastr. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my VIP code, the politics of everything, all lowercase and one word, to get 30% off your first 3 months of Zencastr Professional. How good is that? I want you to have the same easy experiences I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story. Yes, so I asked this question of all my guests because I love to join the dots. What did you want to be as a kid? Did you think you'd work in this medical field, or did you have different dreams and aspirations when you were a lot younger?
Oh, what a lovely question. Well, when I was very little, I wanted to be a hairdresser. So that was
very different to what you're doing now.
Yes, yeah. Although communication's big with my own hairdresser, so that's something in common.
That is true. But obviously, that's not where you ended up, and
no.
You know, you've obviously had a very successful career in what you do, and very multifaceted, as we discussed in the introduction. If we can get into today's topic, what do you define as trauma, just for everyone listening who might be sort of, skirting around this? And how do we know that it's affecting us in a more profound way than we perhaps realise? And I'm thinking especially over time, major life events that are clearly traumatic, that might be obvious to us. But sometimes I imagine we hold on to trauma for longer periods than the event itself.
Oh, absolutely. So the effects of trauma can be very long-lasting and quite insidious, but the actual definition of trauma is something that's kind of debated quite hotly in the field. If you go by the official definition of trauma, the DSM-5 is actually quite, that's the kind of diagnostic book for psychiatrists. It's quite restrictive. It restricts trauma to something that's a life-threatening event, and it also includes sexual assault. So it is a very sort of restricted definition, but I like to talk to my clients about big T trauma and little t trauma, and this is kind of a slightly more nuanced kind of interpretation of trauma. So big T trauma is what we normally think of as trauma, like the car accidents or the assaults or something that's reported in the news, so to speak, or war or police shootings, that sort of trauma. And little t trauma is a little bit different to that. So big T trauma is often something that happened to you. Little t trauma is something that you missed out on, or something that you didn't get. So little t trauma can be exclusion, for example. Like, for example, bullying in girls is very much about exclusion. It's not being part of the group, not being invited to things. And whilst we can pass that off as just something that's, everyone has that experience in their teenage years, that kind of bullying can definitely be trauma. Or it can be more subtle than that. It can be, parenting that you didn't receive when you were a kid. So, the recognition, the validation that you didn't get, the communication that didn't happen, the support that wasn't there. So, that can make even quite small events in childhood quite traumatic if people don't have the support that they need to kind of successfully make it through that event. So
yeah, that makes sense. So how is complex trauma perhaps misdiagnosed in your experience? And is there any ways that you think we can maybe tackle this better from a collective point of view? You're obviously an expert in the space, but, I'm thinking about some of the, recent guests that I've had on. We've talked about just making, public awareness about issues, having conversations, making these topics something that is in our everyday vernacular can actually help raise awareness. What's your experience of this?
Absolutely. So there's about 5 questions in that question.
Yeah, there sure is.
So complex trauma, complex PTSD is something that I work a lot with. Like most of my inpatient clients at Cabrini do probably have complex trauma or complex PTSD. So that is trauma that happened either at an early age or was repeated and sort of unrelenting trauma, or trauma that included some sort of betrayal, like, for example, trauma that's perpetrated by a caregiver. So a caregiver's role is supposed to be someone who looks after a child or looks after a person. And then if they don't fulfill their role, if there's a lack of care or there's perpetration of assault or that sort of thing, there's the added dimension of the child not being cared for and not being protected, and also hurt by someone that they are supposed to love and rely on. So that's complex trauma. But you can also experience complex trauma as an adult. For example, I've looked after a few people in the police force, and goodness me, they...
Probably because the nature of their jobs, right?
Yes.
Like, I couldn't imagine you could do a job like that or be in the sort of, allied health space, like an ambulance practitioner, and actually not have some degree of trauma because of what you're seeing and experiencing every day.
Yeah, they really are at the coalface of everything bad that happens in our society. And,
yeah, absolutely.
They see everyone in a state of shock and a state of terror. And, so they deal with really dreadful stuff all the time. So, I think, if you're in that industry, it's hard to come out the other end of your career without having PTSD or CPTSD, which is the complex PTSD.
Absolutely. And we talked a little bit in the introduction about this term, this EMDR group therapy that you utilise in your practice.
Yeah.
How is it, I guess integrated, and it seems to me quite an innovative way to resolve these traumatic experiences because you're in a more contained environment, but it's in a group, for example, which for some people might be very confronting. But what's your take on this, I guess?
Yes. So EMDR it can actually be quite a private experience. So we're working on the trauma, but the person is working sort of within themselves. So it's not like normal talk therapy. So you're not kind of explaining the event and telling your therapist about your reactions. So EMDR, eye movement desensitisation and reprocessing, incorporates other stimulus that we sort of apply whilst the client is thinking about their experience. So that can happen online and it can happen in groups. So normal group therapy might be, discussing how you're coping with, I don't know, there are bereavement groups and that sort of thing. So normal group therapy is all about communication and what happens sort of within the group. But EMDR group therapy is very much it's kind of the opposite to that. So there's actually a rule in the group when we're doing EMDR group therapy that we don't talk about our particular trauma, because we don't want to give other people our trauma. We don't want to share our trauma because they'll experience vicarious trauma from that. So
Yes. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it like that actually, but
yeah.
that does make sense.
Yeah, especially if you are a bit vulnerable and you're already a little bit fragile, then hearing about other people's experiences can be exceedingly difficult and can exacerbate things. So we are very, very careful not to further harm our clients in that way. So yeah, in terms of how it works, we get the group all on a Zoom call, and then we set up the memory, and then we start the alternative stimulation, which is generally tapping or eye movements, and people just kind of work quietly away at their own experience, and then we kind of check in every 30 seconds to a minute type of thing.
Okay. And how long would each session go for? Is it similar to when you would go to perhaps, a psychologist? It's like an hour long, or is there a sort of a time limit on this and this process as a group?
Yeah, so the groups that I'm setting up are 2 hours long, and we do them weekly for 6 weeks. And
so it's fairly intense, I imagine. Like you probably,
it is intense.
Yeah, get through a lot in that time.
Yes, you do. Yeah. So each 2-hour session, we do some resourcing, which is sort of reminding people about their positive qualities and their strengths and their abilities. So we do a little bit of that. We do a little bit of resourcing in terms of, I like to use imagination. So we use imagination in that we think of someone particularly kind or wise or protective, so that we have that imaginative experience available to us while we're doing the processing. Yeah, so each 2-hour block we do some resourcing, some good positive stuff, and then we do the difficult in-depth trauma work, and then we finish off with some relaxation and sort of consolidation and feedback. So
Interesting.
Jam-packed 2 hours.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a lot. We have touched on this a little bit earlier in our conversation today, but you talked about big T trauma and small T trauma. With the nuances of that, do you deal with it differently, or is the impacts similar on people in terms of, I guess, how it might affect their life, like things like PTSD versus, I guess, maybe just a fear or phobia about certain things because of, past experience? How do you navigate that? And are they interlinked as well? I'm just thinking most of us in our lives have had probably both at some point.
Yes. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And if we have the positive resources, then we can cope with the trauma and sort of assimilate it and learn something about ourselves that is not terrible. So in some ways, the problem with trauma is what we learn about ourselves from that event. So say, for example, if we're in a car accident, so we're in a car accident, we're a little bit hurt, but we walk away, that for some people will be intensely traumatic because they learn that I'm not safe or I'm in danger. And that learning about themselves is what kind of does the damage a bit further down the track. So they take that self-view into everywhere they go, every situation they're in, every interaction they have. I'm not safe. And that
might not be just in a car situation.
Correct.
Is that what you're saying? They could
Correct.
just be at a social situation or kind of doing something quite different to that particular event.
Exactly right. Yes.
Yeah.
And it can escalate. So people can, just be afraid of walking out the door because this cognition, this belief about themselves, I'm not safe, can be very, very pervasive.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'd never thought about it like that. Hypnotherapy is something we've also alluded to in your bio when we discussed, who you are and what you do. How does this benefit the people you work with? And is it something that you use universally, or is it on a selective basis?
Yeah, so I've sort of moved away a little bit from hypnotherapy just because I find that EMDR is much more effective. So, but I do still use my skills in hypnotherapy in terms of relaxation. So that's often something that I'll do with my clients, either in preparation for EMDR, just so that they've got a tool so that they know how to relax and that they know how to kind of bring their mind into that easier sort of state, that more relaxed state. or after a session of EMDR, just to make sure that they're okay to walk out the door and that they can sort of be contained again and they can be back on deck with normal life. So I'll often use it as a bit of a bookend. I rarely use it as a standalone therapy now. I used to use it a lot with eating disorders, but I do find that EMDR is more effective in my practice. So
yeah, absolutely. And I guess, is that what you're known for as well? Do you think that that's sort of when people come to you because it is something you're specialising in now,
definitely.
people are sort of, seeking you out in that way?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
It's interesting. And so I guess, if you were to sort of think about your practice and overall, is there something for people perhaps who not quite sure even if they are suffering from trauma, or there are certain ways in which they can identify it? Because I think sometimes people, and myself would be included in this, you think you're okay, but you may not be okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I guess there's the classic symptoms of PTSD, like the hypervigilance, which means that just feeling on edge all the time, and that feeling of, oh my God, something's going to happen and I have to be careful, I have to be aware. I'm on that sort of scared side of normal. Flashbacks, re-imaging the event, like, you might be walking along and then suddenly you realise that your brain's actually just been reliving that bad event that happened to you. Nightmares and dreams, like if you're having nightmares about something, really that's a really good sign that you need to have some treatment for it, because that's one of the symptoms that goes away very quickly with a few sessions of EMDR.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that would make sense. And there'll be perhaps reoccurring nightmares about the situation. Is that? Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, interesting.
But
so it's good for me to know that, because I think sometimes you can easily just think that, as I said, you are okay and that you're not necessarily having to deal with it.
Yeah. I mean, we can all sort of put things in the closet, so to speak. So
compartmentalise, I think is the word I'm looking for. Yeah.
To an extent. And then, I use this metaphor of like your hallway cupboard. I don't know if you've got one, Amber, but
we all have one. The one that's just got everything shoved in it, I think.
So if we have one trauma, we can shove it in the hallway cupboard and then close the door and walk away from it. And if we have another, that'll fit into, and we can fit a few big things in there. But at some stage, that hallway cupboard is going to get too full, and even adding one more tennis ball to that cupboard will mean that you can't shut the door on it, and everything will just come tumbling out. And I often find that that's when people kind of come and seek help, because they've kept the other traumas kind of packed away and in the cupboard out of sight until one more little thing happens. And even that other thing may be quite small, but just on top of the trauma load that you've already got, it just makes everything intolerable. So
absolutely, like the straw that broke the camel's back, kind of the saying that
right.
It's pretty old-fashioned now, but it's kind of the same sort of idea, I guess. Changing tack a little bit, you obviously have a business and you're in the business world. Is there a particular app, tool or hack, can't be a smartphone, that you're finding really useful in what you do? And it might be anything from organising your calendar to automating some of your socials. And I guess why are you enjoying that at the moment? Because a lot of people listening are in the business world.
This is not a great question to ask me, Amber, because I'm not particularly tech savvy. My favourite tool in terms of tools of my trade are my buzzies. So with EMDR, we use eye movements, and we also use these buzzies that people hold in their hands, and people just love them.
So what are they? Tell us what they are, because I've never seen that.
They're about the size of a matchbox. And there's two of them, and you hold one in each hand while you're doing the processing. But my clients have actually bought these for themselves just as a tool for regulating their emotions at home. They're really soothing. They just buzz from left to right in this nice kind of steady beat, and they're just really soothing. So sometimes if people find themselves to be a bit upset at home and they've got a pair of the buzzies at home, they just turn them on and have a nice little sit down with them. But so they're my favourite.
Tools of the trade, I guess you would call those, really, in what you do.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And what would be your biggest life lesson to date that you're happy to share, and why has it been so important to you?
Yeah, so many, many years ago, and I can't remember the exact quote, so I hope you'll forgive me for this, but when I was in med school, I took a year off about halfway through after fourth year. So I took a year off, and I hadn't really been enjoying med school all that much, and I wanted to experience a bit more of life. And so I took this year off, and in the newspaper or somewhere I read this quote, and I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but it was something along the lines of, every week we get offered 3 opportunities to change our lives. And on average, people take that opportunity about once a year. And I read that quote and I went, oh, okay, this is my year. This is going to be the year that I take every opportunity. And it was actually like such a fortuitous time to read that very inspirational thing, because from then on, during my year off, I took every opportunity that I possibly could and had the most amazing year of my life. So, and I think that that's kind of stuck with me a little bit.
Yeah, that's good though. It's good that you learnt that early, and then you can, I guess, keep doing it.
That's right. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, that's an answer I've never had before, so there you go.
Oh, wonderful.
How do you define your own version of success?
My own version of success. So I think it's about doing something that you're really passionate about and that you derive great satisfaction from. And I'm talking really just in a business career sort of sense at the moment, but I guess it could apply to, families and other sort of leisure pursuits as well. But I feel incredibly happy and lucky at the moment because I'm kind of addicted to my work.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you're in your sweet spot. You're in your flow, as they sometimes call it. Yeah. And just a final takeaway message for us today, Caroline, on the politics of trauma, which of course has been the topic throughout.
That healing is possible.
Yeah, I love that.
So we've our brains are really just amazing, and we can recover and we can feel better, and we don't have to labour with the weight of our trauma forever, and that therapy helps, and EMDR is amazing, and your brain is incredible, and we can make these new neural connections, and we can let go of things and form new ways of thinking about ourselves and new ways of being in the world, and it is possible, and everyone can do it. So that would be my take-home message, and that's what I would love everyone to know, is that you can feel better if you're feeling in a bad place at the moment. You can feel better.
There is hope, I guess, is always good to know that. It's been great to chat to you today about such a big topic, and if you want to connect further and find out a little bit more, we'll have some details from Caroline on our show notes. But until next time, please take care. Thanks so much for listening today. If you've enjoyed the politics of everything, I thrive on your feedback. So please add a short review and share the podcast with your network through Apple, Spotify, and all the usual suspects. I'm always on the hunt for new and diverse guests, so if you or someone you know has a fresh idea you're busting to get out there, please email me at amber@amberdanes.com, and my crew will get back to you very soon.